What's up, everyone? This is Lucas Ross Sports, and you're watching my Lucas Ross Sports channel, and it's time for my New Year's Six Bowl projections after week number 7 of the 2022 college football season. Basically, how this video works, I will give you 4 out of the 6 bowl game projections, and these are based off of how the teams played this past weekend and what I think games will happen in the future. But this is simply a projection. It's not simply my predictions. I mean, I did my predictions back then when I did the preseason predictions, and I still had, I don't really think I'll get any games right, by the end of the year. I mean, all these New Year's Six bowl games are pretty much guaranteed, to not be right at all at the end of the season. But basically, I will give you 4 out of the 6 games. Like I said, we do our college football playoff top 4 standings on Thursday, and I will wait to give you those on this Thursday. So let's get started here with our New Year's Six bowl projections after week number 7 of the 2022 college football season. Let's go to the Rose Bowl first. And this is a big change here. USC versus Alabama. I have them here in the Rose Bowl. Looking at both of these teams, let's start with USC coming off that loss to Utah by 2 points. Defensively, they really struggled to stop the Utah offense. And I think both of these teams are pretty even when you look at them both. I mean, they're coming off heartbreakers. USC, though, the offense was pretty strong, but they were not they couldn't really overcome that, Utah game. And they lost for the first time this season under Lincoln Riley. I still think Caleb Williams is a Heisman contender, though. I mean, he's probably one of the best quarterbacks in the country by far, and possibly in the Pac-12 as, in the conference as well. But I think USC is still, a contender in the Pac-12. I mean, there's top 4 teams in the Pac-12 that are battling for that spot. And I would give it to UCLA, USC, Utah, and of course Oregon are all fighting for that spot in the Pac-12 race. And like I said, the Pac-12 conference is going to be a crazy finish by the end of the season. I mean, any of these teams can win it, the top 4 teams. I would probably take Washington out of that conversation. I mean, you look at all these other teams in the Pac-12, though. They've had some pretty good, seasons so far. I mean, Oregon lost to Georgia in the season opener, but, I mean, they've gotten better as a team as of late. And looking at this matchup here, let's talk about Alabama, though, first as well. Alabama, heartbreaker to Tennessee on the road. The Alabama defense really struggled in this game big time. I mean, you look at, both sides of the ball. I mean, both the offense and defensive side both had penalty issues. I mean, both sides really, struggled. I mean, 17 penalties in a game is not going to win you a game at all. But I know they only lost by 3, but I would love to see this matchup. I would love to see in the Rose Bowl if Alabama or USC, don't make the college football playoff this year. I would love to see this matchup here at the end of the year. The Rose Bowl here. But like I said, it's simply a projection. It's not simply a prediction here that I think will happen. But these are simply games that I think are, that could potentially happen. But USC versus Alabama would be a pretty good one in the Rose Bowl. I mean, both teams are pretty even. If I was going to make a prediction on this game, I would say that Alabama would win it just because they have the defensive advantage. For Alabama, though, both of these teams' schedules don't really get easier. I mean, for USC, they still have to play UCLA because that's a rival game. They still have to play Notre Dame, which Notre Dame lost to Stanford. But that's still going to be a tough game. And then Alabama, they can still win the West. I mean, they had Mississippi State this weekend. But they still have to play Ole Miss on the road. And I think that game right there decides, the SEC West. I think Mississippi State, though, is not out of that conversation just yet. But if Ole Miss wins it, they could clearly say that, they can win the West. And then for Alabama, I mean, they could still make the college football playoff. I mean, both of these teams pretty much are now dark horse contenders in the college football playoff race. Moving on to the Sugar Bowl, I got Clemson versus Ole Miss, an ACC versus SEC matchup here. Clemson last weekend, I know they didn't really perform well against Florida State, only winning that game by 6 points. Basically, I think it was because of the offense. I think, not because of the offense. I think the defense kind of, got a little bit tired at the end of that game there. And I think Clemson, just could not really handle the Florida State offense. Look, I knew it was going to be a close game. I knew Florida State would hang around in that game, and it was potentially a big-time upset alert type game. But Clemson, I think this is still a dark horse playoff contender. They were in my top 4 playoff rankings last week, but they won't be in it this week, as you can see here. Now they're in the Sugar Bowl. Clemson, though, they're still undefeated. Heading into that Syracuse game this Saturday, that is going to determine if Clemson is the top of the, is the top team out of the Atlantic Division. I mean, if Clemson wins that game, I think Clemson versus Syracuse really decides who is the best team out of that Atlantic Division. I mean, we could pretty much say that Florida State and NC State are out of that conversation because Clemson beat NC State and Florida State so far, and then Syracuse defeated NC State this past Saturday. So we could pretty much say those 2 teams are out of it. For Ole Miss, they're undefeated heading into this weekend, coming off a big-time win against Auburn. It wasn't an easy game for the defense, but they were still able to overcome that win and, come up with big-time stops on the defensive side of the ball. And I think Ole Miss really, lands in the Sugar Bowl here. I mean, this would be a really good matchup between 2 great offensive teams. I think defensively it would go to Clemson, but if I was going to make a prediction on this one, I would choose Ole Miss just because the offense is powerful enough to really slow down the Clemson defense and also keep Clemson's defense off the field as well. So, or actually the offense off the field. So I'm going to say that Ole Miss wins that one. But both of these teams are pretty even. I think both of these teams are dark horse contenders as well, especially in the college football playoff. I think Ole Miss would, join that conversation to be a playoff team if they beat Alabama. They still got to play Alabama on the schedule. Also, Mississippi State, that won't be an easy game, but they still got a tough schedule ahead of them. But we'll find out how the season goes for both of these teams. Moving on to the Cotton Bowl, it's the Big 12 versus Pac-12. I got TCU versus UCLA. 2 undefeated teams and 2 also surprise teams in, this college football season. We'll start with TCU coming off that big-time two double overtime win against Oklahoma State this past Saturday. What a finish to that game was. I mean, TCU pretty much was trailing 14-0. I mean, they were off to a great start, or actually a bad start for TCU. But they came back in that game. This is a TCU team that doesn't really give up. I mean, I'm really liking the motivation on this team, and I like the coaching staff. I was pretty high on the Horned Frogs coming into this year, but I didn't think they would win, 6 games, start 6-0 to begin the season. But they do have a tough matchup this weekend ahead of them. Both of these teams do have a tough matchup ahead of them. TCU, though, plays Kansas State, and it's pretty much going to decide who is the top team in the Big 12. I mean, both teams are undefeated in that Big 12 conference. They're both undefeated in the conference as well. So, I mean, both teams are pretty even. But TCU, the good news is they get this game, or actually I think it's on the road for TCU, so I think it's going to be a pretty good one there. But we'll see how TCU prevails in that game. UCLA, same thing for them. They're undefeated. They had the easiest schedule coming into this year. They're 6-0 heading into this weekend. They play Oregon on the road. That is going to be a tough matchup. I mean, I think that decides who is at the top of the Pac-12. I mean, I know USC just lost this past weekend, but like I said, the top 4 teams right now in the Pac-12 are UCLA, Oregon, USC, and Utah. Utah, I would probably put them out of that conversation, but I think they are still capable of, going into the Pac-12 championship. And I know they're out of that playoff race, but I think Utah is still a team that you don't want to count out of. And Oregon's just gotten better. Oregon has gotten better ever since blowing out BYU at home. And ever since that Georgia loss, they've been completely a different team. So I think both of these teams right here, though, TCU versus UCLA, if I was going to make a prediction on this one, I like the motivation from both of these teams. I mean, this one's a tough one to call, but I would like to go with TCU. I think TCU is an underdog in this game if this game were to happen, so I think I would choose TCU in this game. And they were pretty much an underdog, in that game last week against Oklahoma State. But I think it was going to be an upset alert type game, and it pretty much was. So I'm going to choose TCU to win this game. Now moving on to the Orange Bowl. This is our 4th and last game here for these New Year's 6 Bowl projections. I got Oregon versus Syracuse, and this was a tough one to call, but I knew Oregon, I would choose them as my pick still. Syracuse, on the other hand, they're undefeated. That's why I decided to choose them. Oregon is the only one-loss team on this list right now, that pretty much can go to a New Year's 6 Bowl game. They're coming off a bye week this past weekend. Oregon has gotten better. Like I said, they've gotten better as a team ever since that Georgia loss, and ever since blowing out BYU. They haven't really had some, tough games. I mean, Washington State was a tough game, but I think this Oregon team was still good enough to win that game by a blowout. Syracuse, though, coming off that big-time win against NC State, maybe the absence of Devin Laurie really killed NC State, and I think that's why Syracuse won the game pretty easily. The defense was pretty strong. The defense has been pretty strong all year so far for Syracuse. Head into a tough matchup this weekend, though, against Clemson. If Syracuse wins that game, they are at the top of the Atlantic Division and could possibly go to the ACC Championship and possibly meet North Carolina. I think North Carolina is at the top of the Coastal Division as well. I mean, both of these teams right here are pretty even, but I would say that Oregon wins the game. Like right here, if this game were to happen in the Orange Bowl. And like I said, Oregon is a dark horse, I believe, in the playoff race. Syracuse, I wouldn't really call them a playoff contender. I think they will lose, maybe a couple games down the stretch, maybe 3 games, because the schedule is going to get pretty tough for Syracuse. For Oregon, though, I mean, they got an easy schedule. If they win out, they could possibly go back to the Pac-12 championship. But who will they meet? Will it be UCLA? Will it be USC or Utah in a rematch? I mean, Oregon's looking for a rematch against Utah in that Pac-12 championship. Those are my New Year's 6 bowl games after week number 7 of the 2022 college football season. Like I said, we'll have some playoff. We'll have the top 4 playoff standings coming up this Thursday right here on the channel. And if you're new, please subscribe to this channel if you are new and get after the views here on this channel. We are, trying to shape this channel up to being a really good college football, also a sports/content great channel. So, and also, keep subscribing to this channel. And also stay tuned here for more on the Lucas Ross Sports Channel.